What if I told you that the secret to mastering your emotions, especially anger, isn't about suppressing it, but about understanding its real power? Imagine a moment where frustration bubbles up, whether it's someone cutting you off in traffic, a colleague making that same mistake again, or even a close friend betraying your trust. Now picture yourself in those situations, completely unshaken. No boiling blood, no impulsive reactions. Just calm, controlled, and in charge of your response. Sounds impossible, right? But what if the solution to handling your anger isn't about avoiding it, but transforming it into something constructive? It's not about denying what you feel, but learning how to turn that fire into clarity. There's a way to take control when it feels like everything is pushing you to explode, and I'm about to show you how. Stick around, and I'll share the exact strategies you need to master your emotions in any situation. And hey, if you find value in these insights, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss the tools we're about to dive into. Identify the real trigger. It's not what you think. What if I told you that the reason you're angry isn't actually the reason you think you're angry? Sounds strange, right? But the truth is, most of the time, what sets us off isn't the external event itself, but the underlying interpretation or expectation we've attached to it. This is where the trick lies. It's not the rude driver, the unhelpful coworker, or the missed opportunity that fuels your anger. It's your internal dialogue about what should have happened versus what actually did. Think back to a recent moment when you felt your blood boiling. Maybe it was someone interrupting you during a meeting, or perhaps it was something as simple as a delayed response to an important message. You likely told yourself, "They don't respect me," or "This always happens to me." In that split second, your mind created a narrative about the event, and that story is what stoked the fire of anger. But what if you could pause and question that story before it takes control? This is where the mastery begins. Instead of reacting to the situation, stop and ask yourself, why does this bother me? Is it really about the situation, or is it about an expectation I had that wasn't met? 9 times out of 10, you'll find that your anger stems not from the event itself, but from the gap between your expectations and reality. It's like you've created an invisible rule book that the world didn't agree to follow. This rule book says things like, "People should always be polite," or "I deserve immediate attention." When life doesn't go according to these rules, frustration and anger take over. Here's the tricky part. Once you realize that the problem lies within your interpretation, you're faced with a choice. Do you continue to cling to the narrative, letting it fuel your anger? Or do you step back and accept that your expectations are just that? Expectations, not guarantees? This shift in thinking doesn't mean you allow people to walk all over you, but it does mean you stop giving away your power by reacting to things outside your control. Now, this doesn't mean you suppress your feelings or pretend everything's fine. Instead, it's about acknowledging the emotion without letting it control you. When you recognize that your anger is born from your own expectations, you regain control. You're no longer a passive victim to your emotions. You become an active participant, deciding whether or not this situation is worth your energy. Here's an example. Let's say you've planned a big presentation at work, and the technology fails right as you're about to start. Naturally, you might feel a surge of anger and frustration, but instead of spiraling, pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself here? Is it something like, "This should have gone smoothly," or "Things like this shouldn't happen to me"? Once you recognize that these are expectations you've created, you can shift your focus to what you can control, your response. You can choose to adapt, find a solution, and move forward without letting the situation ruin your day. The tricky lesson here is that most of your anger isn't really about the situation itself. It's about how you've chosen to frame it. And once you realize this, you can begin to see that the power to change your emotional state lies entirely within you. You may not be able to control the rude driver or the malfunctioning technology, but you can control how you interpret and respond to those events. And in doing so, you transform a moment of anger into an opportunity for growth and self-mastery. 2. Distance yourself from the emotion before it consumes you. What if the secret to managing your anger was learning to create just enough distance between you and the emotion before it fully takes over? It sounds like a paradox, but that split-second gap between feeling anger rise and acting on it holds the key to mastering it. The tricky part here is that when anger hits, it feels immediate, like a force that's impossible to resist. But what if you could create enough mental space to see your anger before you react to it? Here's where the mastery lies. Imagine your anger as a wave. It's powerful, it's fast, and if you dive into it without thinking, it'll carry you away. But if you can step back and observe the wave instead of diving in, you'll find that the intensity fades much faster than you think. The trick is in recognizing anger as a temporary state, something that washes over you but doesn't have to define you. And the more you practice creating this distance, the better you get at staying calm in moments when you'd usually explode. The Stoics believed deeply in this idea of distancing yourself from your emotions. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, often wrote about how the mind has the ability to step back and watch its own thoughts. This isn't about repressing your feelings or pretending they don't exist. Instead, it's about acknowledging the emotion without letting it dictate your actions. By observing your anger from a distance, you're not letting it control your response. You're simply watching it rise and fall, like a wave that eventually breaks and recedes. So how can you apply this in your daily life? Let's say you're in a conversation and someone says something that immediately triggers you. Your natural response might be to snap back, to let your anger take control. But instead of reacting, take a breath. That's it, a single breath. In that brief moment, you're creating a space between the stimulus, what was said, and your response. You're stepping out of the wave and watching it rather than diving in. That breath gives you just enough time to realize that this anger is temporary and that you don't have to react right away. This isn't about avoiding confrontation or letting people walk all over you. It's about responding with clarity rather than reacting impulsively. When you distance yourself from the immediate surge of anger, you gain perspective. You see the situation more clearly, and you're able to choose a response that aligns with your values rather than letting the emotion drive you. This shift in mindset takes practice, but the more you do it, the more you'll notice that you're in control, not your emotions. The tricky part of this lesson is that it sounds simple, but it requires conscious effort in moments when your emotions are strongest. When you feel the anger building, your instinct will be to act on it, to let it guide you. But if you can remind yourself to pause, even for just a moment, you'll discover that the wave of anger is not as powerful as it seems. It rises, yes, but it also falls. And in that space between, you have the power to choose your response. The real challenge is learning to consistently create this distance. But once you do, you'll find that anger no longer controls you. Instead, it becomes something you can manage, something you can observe, and something you can choose to act on or not. This skill of stepping back, of creating space between your emotion and your reaction, is the foundation of emotional mastery. And the more you practice it, the more you'll realize that anger, like any other emotion, can be tamed. All it takes is the willingness to pause and observe before you act. Channel your anger. Turn emotion into power. What if I told you that your anger, instead of being something destructive, could actually be the fuel that drives your greatest achievements? It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? After all, we've been conditioned to think of anger as something negative, an emotion we should avoid, suppress, or ignore. But here's the trick. Anger itself isn't the problem. The real issue is what you do with that anger. When channeled correctly, anger can become a source of energy, focus, and motivation that propels you forward instead of holding you back. Here's where the mastery comes in. Instead of letting your anger control you, learn to direct it. Think of anger like fire. Left unchecked, fire can destroy everything in its path. But when controlled, it can heat your home, cook your food, or forge steel. Anger, like fire, is a powerful force, one that, when harnessed properly, can ignite change in your life. The key is not to fight the anger or try to shut it down, but to use it strategically. Consider this. There are moments in life when frustration builds because something isn't going the way you expected, and the resulting anger feels overwhelming. Instead of reacting in a way that damages relationships or makes the situation worse, pause and ask yourself, how can I use this energy? Anger is energy. When you're angry, your heart races, your body tenses, and adrenaline surges. But instead of letting that energy explode outward in an uncontrolled way, you can channel it into productive action. It's not about denying what you feel. It's about mastering how you use what you feel. Ancient warriors, philosophers, and even artists understood this well. In fact, history is filled with examples of people who turned their anger into power. Think of great leaders who, in moments of personal defeat or injustice, used their frustration to push harder, think smarter, and create something better. Anger, when understood and controlled, can become the drive that makes you refuse to settle for less than you deserve. It can push you to fight harder for your goals, to stand up against what's wrong, or to innovate in ways you hadn't considered before. The tricky part of this lesson is learning how to shift your mindset. Instead of seeing anger as something you need to expel or release, start seeing it as fuel. When something makes you angry, ask yourself, what can I do with this energy? Maybe it's tackling a project you've been putting off, speaking up about an injustice, or using the frustration to push yourself harder in a workout. By channeling the emotional intensity into focused action, you transform anger from something that controls you into something that empowers you. It's also important to understand that channeling anger doesn't mean bottling it up or pretending you're not mad. It means acknowledging that you're angry and then making a conscious decision to use that emotion constructively. For example, if a coworker's disrespect makes you furious, you could lash out and damage the relationship. Or you could use that anger to fuel a productive conversation where you set boundaries and express your expectations. If you're frustrated with a personal setback, use the emotion to push yourself to find new solutions instead of dwelling on the problem. The real trick is recognizing that anger is neither good nor bad. It's how you handle it that matters. When you learn to direct your anger toward achieving your goals rather than letting it destroy your focus, you're tapping into one of the most powerful tools you have. Anger, when channeled correctly, can be a driving force that pushes you to excel, to fight for what matters, and to refuse to accept less than you're capable of achieving. So, the next time you feel that familiar surge of anger, don't rush to get rid of it. Instead, ask yourself, what can I build with this energy? That's when you'll realize that anger, far from being your enemy, can actually be your greatest ally, if you know how to control it. Remember that moment when we first started, when I asked you if anger was something you needed to fight, or something you could master. Now perhaps you stand at the edge of understanding, no longer controlled by your emotions, but in control of how you use them. The question was never about eliminating anger. It was always about how to channel it, transform it, and let it fuel your growth. The power to change is now in your hands. The world won't change until you do. So, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you take what you've learned and put it into practice? The first step is always the hardest, but it's the one that makes all the difference. Even the smallest action today can lead to monumental transformation tomorrow. As you close this video, ask yourself, what story are you living right now? And more importantly, is it the one you truly want to live? The journey to mastery begins not when everything is perfect, but when you choose to take the first step, no matter how imperfect it may seem. Mastery over your emotions isn't just a skill, it's the greatest form of freedom you can achieve. Life's greatest lessons aren't found in how we avoid our feelings, but in how we choose to use them, how we perceive them, and how we grow through them. Just as a sculptor chisels away at stone to reveal the masterpiece within, you hold the chisel of your own mind. That masterpiece, your life, your choices, your emotional mastery, is entirely up to you. The warrior's journey never truly ends, it evolves. And now, it's your turn to step onto the battlefield of your own mind. Imagine a future where every challenge is an opportunity, where frustration and fear become fuel, and where you stand as the master of your own fate. That future is within reach, but it's something you must create. The future doesn't just happen, it's shaped by the choices you make right now. This may be the end of this video, but it's not the end of your journey. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep striving for mastery. The path you've started is one that never truly ends. Walk it with courage, curiosity, and conviction. Take a moment to reflect on everything you've learned. What has this revealed about your own journey? And more importantly, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, or perhaps a question, one that can't easily be answered. Sometimes it's the hardest questions that lead to the most powerful insights. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.